Today's video has been sponsored by Star Trek Fleet Command, the award-winning MMO full of content that spans over 50 years of your favourite Star Trek stories. Play it for free right now on iOS, Android and PC by using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. This huge game allows you to experience the entire Star Trek universe with your favourite ships and characters from across the many incarnations of the franchise, including the Kelvin timeline. Join millions of players to make alliances, customise your ships, and explore the quadrants of the galaxy. This month's new content is based on the Next Generation, with 15 new missions inspired by the TNG movies, as well as Will Riker and Deanna Troi as officers, and the Machiavellian Luther Sloan as a fleet commander. Also new to the game are wave defense missions, where you form a team and collaborate with other players to protect a central point from increasingly difficult enemies. Use the code WARPSPEED to get 10 epic shards of Kirk to help you get started in Star Trek Fleet Command. Available for free on iOS, Android and PC through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code. Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujuana and today we are continuing our examination of the Defense Onion by looking at electronic warfare, or EW. This is an absolutely vital part of warfare in the technological age, though one that flies under the radar most of the time. To a casual inspection it seems to be forgotten about in sci-fi, but that's just because it's rarely referred to as electronic warfare. Let's define what it is first before getting into all that though, and it's fairly simple on the face of it. Simply put, electronic warfare is all about gaining control of and using the electromagnetic spectrum for attack and defense. In real life, this generally applies to the spectrum in the range of radio to visible light, inclusive, since we don't really use those higher frequency things. In sci-fi, it's very common for there to be other technologies making use of things beyond the electromagnetic spectrum, like subspace or something, although it may not be correct on a technical level, in spirit those technologies are included as well. To further define EW, Lockheed Martin's website splits it up into three major sections. Electronic attack, where you disrupt, deny, degrade, destroy, or deceive the signals of the enemy. Electronic protection, where you prevent your receivers being jammed or deceived. And electronic support, sensing what's going on in the spectrum. Some easy examples, and one of the simplest parts of EW to understand, are the countermeasures that military aircraft can deploy against incoming missiles, flares and chaff. Flares emit strong infrared light designed to deceive heat-seeking missiles, while chaff is made up of lots of metal ribbons that cause a large and chaotic radar return to disrupt and degrade the seekers of radar-guided missiles. However, this inevitably leads to improved missiles that are better at discerning between the correct target and a countermeasure, so there's always an arms race going on between electronic attack and electronic protection. Chaff is technically a form of mechanical jamming, cue the Spaceballs clip, which is a method using physical objects to reflect signals in odd ways to mess with what the receiver sees. In chaff's case, all those metal strips make a big cloud which generates a big blobby radar return. For aircraft, this cloud has a short period of effectiveness because it moves at wind speed, so they work much better for ships, though I have no idea how good they would be in space. Other methods of physical jamming are corner reflectors, objects which are specifically designed to reflect electromagnetic waves back to their source, which is handy on something like a decoy. With some clever math, you can make a small object look just like a larger one, either providing a distraction or just another target for defenders to engage with. Decoys don't have to be passive though, they can also contain active electronics to further mimic another object, and even carry countermeasures of their own. There's some really funky decoy systems out there, like the Australian Nulka, a hovering rocket intended to lure away incoming missile fire. The other kind of jamming is electronic, using transmitted signals to mess with the sensors of the enemy that use the same wavelengths. There's a whole bunch of varieties of this, ranging from simply beaming back loads of energy to a radar to completely overwhelm the receiver, through deliberately oversizing your radar returns to obscure what you are, all the way up to complicated stuff that manipulates the signal. That last one includes things like changing the range and velocity the radar thinks an object is moving at, or even the creation of entirely false signatures. For some sensors, particularly radar, broadcast power is a significant part of how capable a system is in terms of attack and defense. If a transmitter can simply overpower a jammer, then it wins the fight, though its signal may still be somewhat degraded. This is something that new and innovative technology can overcome, as was the case with the introduction of phased array radars. Rather than the traditional style of single antenna that has to physically turn in order to direct its signal, phased array radars are made up of lots and lots of teeny tiny antennas that are steered electronically. They use clever math to line up the waves they all emit to create a bigger one, and can redirect their signal near instantly and can do things like focus down into a tiny pencil beam. That beam ability enables phased array radars to burn through incoming jamming signals, an effect that the US Air Force and Navy put to the test with the then new AN/SPY-1 system in 1974. They found that EA-6B Prowlers, specialised EW aircraft, could not defeat the radar, so they kicked it up a notch. They brought in a KC-135 carrying a tree shark, a big jammer pod that was equivalent to 32 Prowlers, and even that wasn't enough to stop the radar. If you're a big nerd like me and feel like reading a 26-year-old defence industry article, there's more on the SPY-1 in this Forecast International article. Phased array radars can work the other way as well, in that they can function in a low probability of intercept mode, where their pencil beams hop around frequencies and run in complicated search patterns. This prevents radar warning receivers from recognizing the signals as a threat if they see them at all. Another form of jamming, but this time for infrared, is IRCM. I already mentioned flares earlier, but there's also systems installed on tanks and helicopters that work in a similar manner. They emit an IR signal much greater than what the missile was originally tracking, hoping to cause it to deviate in its flight path away from their target and lose track of the original lock. As with flares, this tech can be countered by better missiles with seekers with improved fields of view, moving optics, or just better software. But as with all arms races, there is an upgrade in the form of directional IRCM. What these systems do is point their IR light, or even a laser beam, directly at the incoming missile with the intent of overwhelming its seeker and blinding it. To be most effective at these measures, you need to know where the signal or threat is coming from so you can direct your jammers properly or deploy countermeasures in time, so you need good sensors of your own. Again, this is a place where there's a big cat and mouse thing going on between EW systems hiding from sensors, and sensors also hiding from EW systems. Or just hiding from regular weapons. After all, taking out a sensor with a precision strike is a bit more permanent than simply jamming it. This is the niche that anti-radiation weapons fill, as they are designed to home in directly on the source of a signal in order to take out the emitter, whether it's a sensor or a jammer. In real life, these are the weapons of choice for suppression of enemy air defense missions, known in the US Air Force by the much more fun name of Wild Weasel. What these badass aircraft do is go in and deliberately get targeted by air defenses in order to locate and engage them with precision strikes. This is obviously a fairly risky prospect, so aircraft that undertake this role often carry electronic countermeasure equipment as well, or work in conjunction with stealthy friends. Which brings up the question of what exactly is the relationship between stealth and electronic warfare? Well, stealth comes under the umbrella of EW and is used in conjunction with it. Remember what I said in the stealth video, it's all about signal to noise ratio. To be effective, stealth just needs to be better than the enemy's sensors. So if you can reduce how effective those sensors are by using jamming, decoys, or through destruction, then it's much easier to be stealthy. And that takes us to cloaking tech, sci-fi's very own super high-tech version of this concept, but not one that I consider to count as stealth. That is a method of reducing an object's sensor signature through clever design, where cloaking tends to be some form of active gadget that can be attached to any ship. In effect, cloaking devices are much more like inverse jamming, in that they turn on a device and reduce their signature to effectively nothing. They do certainly straddle the line between EW and stealth when active though, and are very, very similar to many of those infrared signature reduction systems I discussed in the stealth video. Electronic warfare isn't limited to just sensors and countermeasures. Communications can have all the same parts of EW apply, from defending your own against attacks to degrading those of your enemy. This goes for large-scale strategic comms and the tactical scale, as if a unit can't talk to friendlies around it, they're going to have reduced combat effectiveness. Blocking comms works for other things too, like how these boxes on the front of this Challenger 2 prevent remotely detonated IEDs from being triggered, or how these gun antennas disrupt the link between a drone and its controller. In fact, the very first instance of electronic warfare, which took place over 120 years ago during the Boer War, was an effort to jam communications. Winston Churchill's book, From London to Ladysmith via Pretoria, describes an incident where the British Army was flashing Morse code onto clouds with a searchlight, but the Boers began flashing their own light in the same place in order to confuse the signal. Remote hacking is another element of electronic warfare that sort of sits in its own little subsection of things due to having no defined end goal. The big examples of this in sci-fi are the Cylons through their use of a backdoor in the Colonial Fleet system, and Edie in Mass Effect 2 and 3, who specifically calls out hacking as being one of her main roles. It certainly seems to be an important potential vector for EW in sci-fi, but it's very difficult to figure out how effective it may be. Certainly taking over remote-controlled things would be viable, but having worthwhile effects on enemy spaceships seems dubious without pre-made vulnerabilities to exploit. So that is an introduction to electronic warfare, or at least my bumbling explanation of a complex, interwoven, and sometimes very classified aspect of warfare that is often overlooked. It can be as simple as a sensor automatically deploying countermeasures, or full spectrum jamming rendering advanced weapons utterly useless across entire fronts. As I said in the introduction, sci-fi does make use of it, especially Battlestar Galactica, but rarely refers to it as such. Hit up the comments below for some examples that you can think of. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our Spacefighter design reference book. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by giving us super thanks or by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.